Greetings, adventurer. Welcome to the D20 Academy podcast. I'm Shiloh, and today I'm joined by my friend Brendan to talk about story settings. Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about story settings, campaign settings, things like fantasy, science fiction, post-apocalyptic, all that kind of stuff, and what their strengths and weaknesses are, kind of what they are themselves, and what you can as a storyteller do in these different kind of genres and settings, and what works best in each of them. If you want to keep up to date with what we're doing here at D20 Academy, you can follow us on Instagram at D20_Academy. You can comment or whatever, DM us from there, get to our Discord. We have a whole community there where we talk about anything storytelling or tabletop RPG related. We also have a YouTube channel where we upload the podcast episodes and some exclusive YouTube videos coming out soon. And if you are interested in creating your own campaign, if you're aspiring GM and that sounds like something you want to do, go ahead and go to d20academy.com. I have a free video for you there that takes you through the process of building a campaign on your own. All right, let's get into the episode. Okay, hey. Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
So, apparently the plan is I switch off every week between Gabe and Brendan. I guess that's the that's the deal.
One
now.
day you gotta have both of us on.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm trying to get we're gonna do a mystic extravaganza. I don't know how much you, how good of a friend you are and how much you listen to our podcast. I'm kidding. But, we, have this running joke about, the mystic. Because, we hate it, obviously. I don't know how much you know about it, but...
Gabe played a mystic in... I'm pretty sure you were in that campaign, but I remember it was one of the ones that you didn't come to very often.
Yeah, I never...
We were level 3 characters, and he was dealing 35 damage and one-shotting the enemies, and I was throwing challenge rating 12 enemies at you guys, and
yeah,
everyone would die except for him.
Yeah,
and I was like, you're not playing that anymore.
We always have these jokes about it because it's super broken, and we talk about how one day we're gonna do a 10-hour extravaganza where we go through the 40-page Mystic PDF and
Mystic rebuild.
Yeah, the 10-hour Mystic rebuild, exactly. Did you listen to our Druid one?
No, I didn't.
It's wild. We basically just built a new class. It's not even a Druid anymore, and we're not even finished. Anywho, that's not the point. Today we're talking about story settings.
Yes.
Yes. So what do we mean when we say this?
Well, I'd imagine things like fantasy, science fiction, historical fiction, weird war, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. See, here's the weird thing. So we started talking about genres is what we're going to call it. Here's the weird thing about genres is that fantasy is a movie genre, but so is comedy, which is weird because you can have comedy in a fantasy setting, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's still kind of
action is a movie genre, but so is
can
science
double
fiction.
Dip,
Yeah, but so is science fiction, so you can have action and romance and comedy, also in science fiction. So genre is a really hard thing to kind of pin down because in some sense it's setting, in others it has to do with the content. Hard to explain, but we decided to change it to settings because that makes more sense. We're not talking about comedy, drama. We're not focusing on those things. We're talking about actual settings that stories can take place in. Like fantasy and
and
weird
Korean soap opera.
Space opera. Soap opera. And of course our favorite setting, Korean soap opera. So this is not going to be specifically geared towards tabletop role-playing games, though typically that's mostly what this podcast talks about. We will definitely talk about that, but we're also just talking about stories in general. So, when we talk about something like fantasy, which is the first one we're going to hit on, obviously, we're going to talk about a lot of things about fantasy, and how you as a storyteller can, like, what works well in fantasy, what doesn't, what kind of stories and adventures might you want to build into a fantasy setting, whether you're writing a novel or a script or a campaign. So, we're talking about it all here. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about fantasy. That's number one.
Yes.
The classic
hack and slasher goblins, magic, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Like examples would be like Lord of the Rings, Forgotten Realms. I would even argue like Shakespeare's The Tempest is even a fantasy because it consists of magic and like magical creatures and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Midsummer Night's Dream, that kind of stuff as well. Westeros, of course, Game of Thrones. Yeah. Wheel of Time, all that kind of stuff. Things like Percy Jackson and Harry Potter would also fit into fantasy. So this actually, let's just screw it. Let's talk about subgenres. Okay, so there are a lot of subgenres within fantasy. They actually touch on a lot in the DMG. These are the fantasy subgenres. Some of these are like flavors. Some of these are actually genres. Whatever. But like, for example, dark fantasy. So that is...
I think of Curse of Strahd.
Yeah. Yep, that's very obviously dark fantasy. Sword and sorcery is typically like low magic, more gritty things like Witcher and Conan. Heroic fantasy is your classic Forgotten Realms campaign.
Yeah.
Fairy tales fit into fantasy. So that's, Red Riding Hood, because that has kind of magic. Well, that's actually a bad example. That's a little harder to quantify. But, things like Hansel and Gretel. Cinderella. Disney, things like that. And then urban fantasy is a subgenre that takes place in the period that it is written. And it adds magic and fantasy elements to the real world. So that's like Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, the Dresden Files. It's in the real world, but there are fantasy elements. Now, I don't know what Narnia is. I think Narnia is a bit of a toss-up. Because it is in our world, but there's technically no magical elements in our world except for a gateway to a magical world.
I mean, there's also centaurs and...
Yeah, but in that sense, is that a different setting because they go into a different world?
I don't think so.
Or is it still urban fantasy like Harry Potter?
I think it's still urban fantasy because, it's still within the same story. Right? What's your argument for it not being? Like, I don't see how it...
Because, okay, in Harry Potter, Earth has wizards, and it has magical creatures in it. In Narnia, there's nothing magical in the world or about the world, except for a gateway into another world that is magical.
That's like saying the same thing as, like, the Jimmy Neutron, Fairy Oddparents crossover isn't canon. Like...
I have no idea what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. Narnia is canon. It doesn't matter. Basically, those are some subgenres. Some shrubbery genres. You know what fantasy is. We're not going to spend more time talking about explaining to you what fantasy is. I assume listeners know the fantasy genre. Birthed by Tolkien. Actually, this is really interesting. Little side note. I don't know if you knew this, Brendan, or any of our listeners, or some. So, fantasy is kind of classically known to be, modern fantasy at least, is birthed from Tolkien's works.
Yeah.
Right? And, Tolkien, though, did not set out to, like, invent fantasy or, like, to create, like, a new genre. Actually, Tolkien's goal was to create a mythology for his people. Because of, like, back the Anglo-Saxons, a lot of Great Britain, they lost a lot of history and mythology and stuff during that past time period. And so they didn't really have a lot of, like, mythology and history. So Tolkien set out to make his people a mythology, like how the Greeks and the Egyptians and stuff have their own, which is really, really interesting. I think that's really cool. So actually, Middle Earth is actually Earth. It's actually like Europe a long, long time ago. So Hobbiton is kind of where Great Britain is nowadays. That's the concept. Anywho, that's super interesting, by the way. And obviously, he pulls on...
tower is.
That's actually the... Never mind. I had a joke, but I actually forgot what I was going to say. I was like halfway through it. I was like, oh, that'd be funny. And then I forgot what I was going to say. I can't believe I can't think of it. Yeah, I bet it was really funny. The Empire State Building or something, I'm sure.
Gondor is the French. Or Gondor is the French.
The Gondor is the French. Mordor's America. Oh, but it actually makes sense, though, because also in Middle-earth, like, the people, the Haradrim and stuff who come from the south are, like, based in, like, African cultures.
Yeah.
And, like, the people who come from the east are, like, based around, like, Middle Eastern cultures.
Yeah.
Because that's how it works for Europe. Anywho. And that's why everyone's white, by the way. Just in case I needed to defend Tolkien for some reason. Okay, so that's not the point. The point is, what I'm trying to say is, Tolkien pulled from Old English mythology, such as dragons and knights and stuff like that, to make his own people's mythology. That birthed fantasy from what we get. Fantasy nowadays, things like Azeroth from World of Warcraft and Forgotten Realms and stuff. You know, elves, dwarves, humans, orcs, wizards, that kind of stuff. Now, fantasy is so saturated with content, right? We're talking novels, movies, video games. Fantasy just has so much stories in it already. A million different worlds in the fantasy setting. So we all have, I think, a lot of like knowledge and experience with it. You know, whether we've just gone and seen the Lord of the Rings movies and the Game of Thrones show, or like we've played a ton of fantasy campaigns and we've played World of Warcraft or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Brendan, what do you think are kind of the strengths of fantasy? Why do you think it's such an attractive, popular genre?
I think there's a lot of freedom in fantasy in terms of like magic and creatures. Like you could make up whatever creature you want and it makes sense to be in a fantasy world because there's all kinds of magic, and magic is just kind of like, or at least in my opinion, magic is the things that you can't explain, you know?
Yeah.
Like effects. I mean, I guess you could also, like, in the D&D sense, it's
supernatural,
arcana.
at least.
Yeah, supernatural, and like things like something you can't explain magic. You could, I'm sure you could study it and stuff like in the D&D world, but I feel like a character couldn't explain what it is or how it works and the interesting. It's like the Force.
Well, okay. So let's talk about this real quick. So me and Gabe talk a lot about it in our world building episode on magic. But there are two levels of magic. There's hard magic systems and soft magic systems. Soft magic systems are ones that don't have a lot of explanation and are more like mystical and wondrous. So things like Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
Really, what does Gandalf do? Really, how does magic work? It's not super clear. There's not defined rules. And so it makes the story feel very wondrous and mystical to both the Hobbits, the main characters, and us as readers who are vicariously living through the Hobbits, experiencing the story through them. Because it's like, whoa, like, you know what I mean? Like, magic is wondrous and supernatural, and we can't really understand it. A hard magic system is one that is very explicitly described and has rules. The most popular example would probably be Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Okay, yeah.
Where the magic, you can explain how the magic system works, you know? None is better than the other. Once again, we talk about this in our magic episode. Both serve a different purpose. But yes, I know what you're saying, Brendan, in the sense that, like, magic is a way to create things that, like, have things happen, have things exist that could normally, like, not exist through things like science. Or technology. Yeah, I mean, I think, I would agree with you. I think the freedom of fantasy is really what is really attractive about it. Because with a fantasy world comes, you know, like, races and
Yeah.
monsters and magic and cultures and stuff. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much freedom in it, and once again, with magic and stuff, you can do whatever the heck you want. Anything is possible in a fantasy setting because of that. And so that opens the gateway to a lot of really cool things, you know?
Yeah. In a fantasy world, I mean, almost everything can be, oh, it's because of magic, or oh, it just makes sense for all these, like, oh, there's a supernatural being that makes perfect sense. Is where if you were like
Right.
in a modern setting to be like, by the way, this is Garce Anderson. He's the being of supreme power and can create fire motes from his fingertips.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
And
that
we're gonna
wouldn't
get to
work
modern.
in a modern setting or any
Yeah,
of the
exactly.
most settings.
Exactly. And you know what? People like medievalness.
Mm-hmm.
People like swords and knights and princes and princesses and wizards and like it's just such a cool. It's such a cool genre.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I think the market, I guess I'll say, is saturated in fantasy content, it's never gonna stop.
Mm-hmm. I like you can do more cool things with a sword than you can with a gun.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Exactly. I don't really know how to explain, but
Yeah.
I get what you're trying to say. Anyway, it's fantasy. Amazing. The freedom with it I think is really cool, and I really love how fantasy is evolving. I'm a really avid fantasy novel reader. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm pretty up to date. Like I like to think with like how fantasy as a genre is evolving, at least in the literary circle. Um, and I think where fantasy is going, shifting more from classical fantasy, Tolkien-esque, to really interesting new like worlds and pushing the boundaries of what magic and fantasy mean and stuff. I'm really excited for it. Things like the Stormlight Archive of Brandon Sanderson's new series and stuff like that. I think are like modern fantasy pushing what world building is and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to see where fantasy goes in the future. Let's talk about kind of the weaknesses of fantasy.
I think there's less freedom in weapons, technology, and items because it wouldn't make sense for it to be a fantasy world and then like, oh, the dwarves have an army of Sherman tanks, or like it wouldn't make sense for like here's this like I guess you can always describe things as like magical. Like it makes sense for the dwarves to have some kind of like magical super weapon that they've devised.
Right.
But you can't. I think maybe it's just the way you explain it. Like
Okay.
at the
Yeah.
end of the day, you can't have like guys with like you can't. I feel like you can't have ballistic weapons as much as you can in other like science fiction, historical fiction, modern fiction, those kind of things.
Yeah. Now, of course, you can make your story however you want, and
Mm-hmm.
you can like mix settings and genres, of course. Um, we don't want to put these into like very strict boxes, but in general, yes, fantasy lacks technology, and that could be a good or a bad thing. Um, like I think in one hand, technology makes science fiction, which we'll get into next, really awesome, and also can be a weakness of it. Like you don't in the fantasy worlds, you can't have hacking or
Yeah,
ships or cars or computers or space travel. I mean,
guns.
once again, you can build your own world how you want. Maybe you have magical gateways, and maybe people ride dragons or whatever the heck it is. But really interesting technology and stuff like that typically is lacking from fantasy, and so I think that can limit some of its potential. While you do have like magic, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Magic is not science, basically the
No.
opposite. And so it's going to feel different, you know what I mean? Whereas in a science fiction world, explaining something through science is different than explaining a similar effect through magic. It has a different effect on the world and it has a different effect on your audience, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, imagine how different the Lord of the Rings trilogy would be if Legolas was using a sniper rifle.
That is better, actually.
You think it would be better?
No, okay.
They'd have to change his name to Phase Legolas.
Phase Lego. Oh man. Headshot. Oh, I really murked that noob, Gimli.
360 off the
Off the shield.
Oh, what was the place? Was it Helm's Deep? Where they go
Yeah,
to?
Helm's Deep.
Yeah, off the wall at Helm's Deep.
Yeah. 360 no scoped. Well, Gimli's waving around a lightsaber. Yeah, anyway. Brendan, what do you think, what kind of stories, or like in the case of like campaigns, like D&D campaigns or whatever, what kind of adventures and stuff like do you think work really well in the fantasy genre? Or the setting?
I think the heroic, just classic, like, I guess you could just say, like, what do you imagine the classic, like, hero's adventure to be, you know? Like, the knight going to save the princess, or the group of party members, the wizard, the rogue, and the ranger, and the barbarian going to find a magic item to resurrect some god to defeat the BBEG or something like that, you know, just classic what you'd imagine when you hear D&D.
Yeah.
Like,
now,
I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah, obviously, once again, okay, this is the last time I'm going to say this, okay? You can do anything in fantasy, you can do any kind of stories and all that kind of stuff. But, yes, like, you can make darker things or whatever. Yes, I think the term adventurous or adventure, travelogue, works really well in fantasy. You know, you have to get from here to here, right? That's your classic fantasy story, is get from here to here. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's what you encounter along the way, whether it's giant spiders or trolls or Gollum or, you know, and then at the end, it's, you know, you destroy the ring, but really it was about the friends you made along the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Classic adventure, you know? Going places, encountering things during your journey, taking down a dark lord, right? Once again, it doesn't always have to be like this, but like heroic, you know, things. Typically. Quests. Actually, quest is another great term for fantasy. Like, you know, a quest to go get the item, or to kill the guy, or to save the person. You know, we all know. Skyrim, we all know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I agree. I think the strengths are in fantasy with that adventure. Because of the freedom, and I think because the world building, you can be so rich and in your world building that there's a never-ending supply of things you can throw at the party. A never-ending supply of interesting locations they could end up in. Whether it's a magical grove, or dungeons, or caverns underneath the ground, or a city in the sky, and whether they're confronting kings, or dragons, or whatever it is.
Taverns and...
Yeah, exactly. Going to new locations, meeting people, killing things, getting treasure. You know what I mean? Classic. Okay.
Swords and shields.
Swords and shields. Okay, let's hop over to science fiction. Okay. Do you have any starting words? Do you have any opening things you want to say about science fiction?
When you think of science fiction, technology, space travel is always seems to be a must in science fiction. I don't know why, because you can have things like cyberpunk where it's still based in Earth, but it just Star Trek, Star Wars, those kind of stories. I mean, even though Star Wars is kind of a space opera, but I'd still consider it in the science fiction. I think just high technology, definitely in the future.
Yeah,
or very
I think,
futuristic. I wouldn't say in the future, but futuristic.
I think that is like the key. Fantasy, it typically pulls from the past. Typically, technology is less advanced than nowadays, how it is nowadays. we're back in the medieval times or ancient times, whereas science fiction is typically in the future. Technology is more advanced. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big differentiator. So obviously, example: Star Trek, Star Wars, Dune, Cyberpunk, 2077, stuff like that. Classic science fiction examples. Now, I've always been a fantasy guy. I'm obviously a huge Tolkien fan. I'm a big fantasy reader. I love fantasy. I've played Dungeons and Dragons for years and years. Obviously, I love fantasy a lot. However, I mean, I've always really kind of liked science fiction. I've always been a Star Wars fan. But recently, I have been actually kind of getting into science fiction.
I've always liked science fiction more than fantasy.
You have? Mm-hmm. Really? I didn't know that.
I don't know why, but I think it just appeals more to me.
Yeah, I think there's so many things about science fiction that you don't get in fantasy, and vice versa, that I'm really starting to get into. I just read Dune. That was really cool. I've been playing some more like science fiction, like video games and stuff. I don't know. I like. We've been playing a Star Wars campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I just read through the Starfinder rulebook for the first time. And that was really cool. Starfinder has a really fun world, which is kind of a mixture between fantasy and science fiction. It breaks a little bit of what we're going to kind of talk about as classic science fiction today, because it actually has like a really like a magic system and stuff like that. But yeah, science fiction is awesome. Some subgenres include space opera, which is things like Star Wars, big space battles in space, and big sweeping tale. It's kind of like fantasy, but in the future. Cyberpunk. I love the cyberpunk genre. Mm-hmm. Just like neon lights and futuristic mafias and dirty futuristic Vegas, and like, oh, I love that. I really want them to come out with a new edition of the Cyberpunk role-playing game, because the last one came out like the 90s or whatever, and its system is pretty outdated, and not that streamlined. Because I really want to play a RPG in a cyberpunk world. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
I think I would want to see a Star Wars movie, but cyberpunk style. Like, I feel like we were kind of close with that in the beginning of Solo.
Right.
But it just kind of went off to the side. I think it would be really cool, like set in Corellia or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think now that we're doing a ton of other things with Star Wars, with Mandalorian being kind of like a Western, and we're touching other things with it, because typically Star Wars is like a fantasy movie, you know what I mean? Get from here to here, beat the bad guy, use magic to beat the bad guy, and have a sword fight with the bad guy at the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas now we're starting to do other things with the Star Wars universe, so I agree. I think more of a down-to-earth kind of gritty, well, not necessarily grittier, but like, a darker, more, morally ambiguous cyberpunk kind of deal. By the way, this is really random, but so we've been playing our Star Wars campaign for over a year now. We're on the 4th arc, major plot arc, and we've been talking a lot about how good it would be as a show.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know, I think it would just be a really good show. And so we've been like dreamcasting and stuff for fun. And then like last week I was like, dude, I should just for fun like write a pilot episode. I am a little bit of a aspiring screenwriter, not that I want to be a screenwriter, but I really like storytelling. So I have written scripts in the past. I've actually shot short films and stuff, and like a short series. That's irrelevant. The point is, I wrote a pilot script for if our Star Wars campaign was like a show. I think it was like 35 pages long, and I think it would approximate to about 40 minutes, which is like a good pilot length. And then I wrote the second episode, which is about the same length as well, 40 pages or something.
You got exactly 40 pages on the second one, I think.
Yeah. Those have been a lot of fun. So we've been like doing read-throughs. Everyone reads as their character and stuff. That's really fun. But actually, and you know what? I think we're going to like, after I write the first season and like draft it, revise it and stuff, I'm shooting for about 6 episodes. then like we can actually post it on the Discord or Reddit or something like that, so you guys can actually be able to take.
We could do a live read on the podcast.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that'd be
I
fantastic.
mean, I don't want to like take over or anything, but I'm just saying, just giving you suggestions.
No, definitely. I've definitely considered that. Yeah. What the point is, that actually feels kind of cyberpunky. The beginning, at least. They're in the city. They're dealing with like thugs and gang lords and like stuff like that in the Star Wars universe. That was a really big bunny trail. Hey, let's talk about the strengths.
I honestly forgot what we were talking about.
Let's talk about the strengths of science
I looked
fiction.
back at our sheet that we're on. And I'm like, oh, that's right.
Yeah. What are the strengths of science fiction?
Like if you like the technology, the aliens, because I mean, aliens, you can be like all kinds of aliens, especially like robots and stuff. Like, there's a lot of freedom if you want to be a robot.
Yeah.
It's very open world because you can go wherever you want in the galaxy.
It's actually so open world. It's open galaxy, exactly. It's
But
more
that
than
can also,
open world.
as a GM, that could be hard if you want to, like, if you're trying to
Yes.
give your characters, because your character's like, no, we want to go here now, you know, and you're like, no, but I planned for here, but you don't want to be the guy who, like, no, you're not doing that. You don't want to.
Well,
You don't want to be the
that's
railroad DM.
That's the same in fantasy, though. You can do that in anything.
I guess I just see it as bigger problem, or just to me, just in my head, it would be a bigger problem in science fiction with space travel and stuff.
Typically, how people do their world building, but really galaxy building for science fiction stories, is they treat the galaxy like the map, and planets just act as biomes.
Okay, yeah.
So, like in Star Wars, Mustafar is the volcanic planet, and Camino is the rainy, stormy water planet.
Even doesn't actually make sense in
The
reality.
the forest moon of Endor is the forest jungle planet. So you still have the various environments that you would still get in like a fantasy world, but instead like planets are dedicated to it rather than like regions. So nothing's really like Earth, where like there's a planet that has
and
all the biomes.
in building, in a map in a fantasy world, you kind of have to think like you can't go from Sahara Desert to icy.
Yeah.
But I guess in a fantasy, not a fantasy, in a science fiction world, since everything's so isolated on that single planet, the players you don't have to have a transitional planet.
You
can
go
have
from Tatooine to Hoth.
I mean, not like that. I don't know how close they are in the unit of the world,
close,
but or in the galaxy, but
yeah. So the planets and like the worlds, that's really cool. The technology. I mean, you can have hacking and cars and ships and
super
comms.
laser tanks.
Guys, comms.
Comms are the best.
Can we talk about comms for a second? You don't realize how much you need comms as a party until like you go back to fantasy, and you're like, why? Like, I really wish we could just talk to each other over long distances. It would make things so much easier. Yeah.
You can split the party without as much of a.
Yeah, exactly. It's comms are the most useful things in the world. But you get the technology. It also leans more towards ranged combat and stuff, because in fantasy, in a ship battle, the ships maybe shoot some cannons at each other, and then they go up next to each other, and they board, and then fight hand to hand, right?
Yeah.
In a space battle, why would you board if you have just fat laser cannons on your ships? You know what I mean? And why would you engage if you have a blaster rifle? Yeah. So it also leans more towards that, which is a good or bad thing depending on what you want. And, also, depending on the world you build, it can be different. Like, in Starfinder, there's still very much viable, like, flame axes and, vibro swords and stuff like that, melee weapons.
Yeah.
Also, in Dune, which is really cool, is not everybody, but, like, you wear this, like, thing called a shield, which, like, projects, like, this kind of, like, field around you that deflects any high-speed projectiles. meaning that if someone's wearing a shield, the only way you can kill him is with like a knife.
That's cool.
Yeah, so like it forces them back. It forces them back
Yeah.
into melee combat.
That's really cool.
Yeah, you know how like Kevlar blocks against bullets, but not against knives.
That's super ineffective against knives.
Yeah, because like it tightens at the high speed
with ballistics.
So it's like that in Dune. So that's an excuse to then go back to like for them to have melee fights and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Obviously, you can still do that kind of stuff, but typically it leans more towards that. You can have things like mech suits and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, technology is a strength, but it is also a weakness. I'm going to talk about the weakness here. I put science down on the document, which is half the name of the genre. Science is a strength and a weakness. Here's why. In fantasy, you can talk to dead people with magic.
Mm-hmm.
You can cast a fireball with magic. These doors only open with a password because of magic or whatever, right? In science fiction, you have to explain things with science. Now, you can explain things through fictional science like, oh, it's because of this mineral that we found on this world that is not real or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like things tend to have more of a realistic scientific like meaning behind it that you need to figure out. And that needs to like make sense, you know? Unless you have a magic system like the Force, science is kind of the way to go. And let's say you're playing in a campaign or whatever, right? In a science fiction universe. Let's not talk about Star Wars for a second.
Yeah.
You don't have magic. And so that definitely turns you away from many of the kinds of things that you would use in a fantasy campaign. So, me who's been running Star Wars after running a long D&D campaign, I was used to building adventures and things and being able to explain things with magic. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And
I guess so.
the Force, though, I can still do it, but it's still pretty limited.
Yeah, because like the
You
Force
know?
isn't like
Yeah.
super common, especially in the time we're playing in.
Yeah. So it's hard. It means that you can't do the same kinds of, you can't build the same kind of adventures or whatever that you would in like a fantasy story. It actually is harder. Because you can't use scapegoats, you can't use cop-outs, you have to actually figure out ways for things to work. You know? Instead of just saying
can always,
magic.
like, I guess you could always be like, he has higher armor or something because, yeah, like you said earlier, the special mineral or, like, cybernetics I feel are pretty good, but you can't talk to dead people.
Yeah,
and you
but
can't
you can't have like rituals.
Yeah, you couldn't bring, I think there's no way to do Revify or anything like that in
Yeah, you can't have
a science
gods.
because once someone is dead, they're dead.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's technology that brings them back to life, but then you have to make the technology, you know, make sense, like, scientifically and stuff. So, like, even lightsabers, right? It's not a magical sword. It's a sword that uses a special kind of crystal in a technological device to produce that, right?
Yeah.
So, it's a blessing and a curse. Let's talk about the kind of stories and adventures that you would tell in a science fiction world. How much time are we? Oh my gosh, we're 40 minutes through on the second one. Okay. I think science fiction leans actually a lot away from the quest adventurousness. I think science fiction actually typically tackles deeper concepts.
Yeah.
I think things like revolution and like ethics.
Yeah. Politics
For sure, huge in science fiction. Intrigue, stuff like that. And even I feel like even though sometimes it's not a fantasy world, there is some maybe like racial dynamics between like elves and dwarves don't like each other or whatever. I feel like in science fiction, it's such a bigger theme. Like, do aliens have rights or do robots have rights? All that kind of androids, like in Blade Runner. Oh my gosh, I love Blade Runner, by the way.
I've never seen any of the Blade Runner movies.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know why. I've been like, oh, I should probably watch Blade Runner sometime.
But Blade Runner, those movies tackle the basically, it's like a science fiction world. It's pretty cyberpunkish, actually. But like the concept is like we have built androids which look just like humans, except they're not. They're kind of more programmed kind of things, and
Yeah.
so it tackles themes of like what makes a human a human. Is it their soul? Is it their free will? Like what? It tackles really deep things like that. And then also in the newer one, Blade Runner 2049, there's this technology that basically like gives you like a wife, like a holographic wife who like reacts to you and like looks like how you want her to look and says what you want to hear or whatever. But obviously you can't like touch her or anything because she's a hologram.
Yeah.
And it's like does she have like did this character, her name's Joy, like have a soul? Can the main character connect to her on an actual human basis, like of love and like all it tackles the deeper things because of like technology and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also like science fiction also sometimes tackles like what am I trying to think? Like environmentalism and stuff like that. Like in Dune, that's very based off of like environmentalism and like how environment reacts to technology and humanity being greedy and all that kind of stuff. Like in Interstellar, we've screwed up the Earth so bad that we got to go find a new planet to live in stuff. I'm not saying Interstellar is technically science fiction, but stuff like that.
Yeah.
Now, can you have Star Wars space operas where you go on an adventure to defeat the Dark Lord? Yes.
Of course you can. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, obviously, once again, you can do whatever you want. But in my opinion, I think science fiction thrives in tackling deeper, more complex topics because of the fact that we have things like technology and stuff like that. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we gotta move on.
What next? Modern day?
Yep, this is the easiest, probably.
So just kind of like modern day, obviously stories that would take place in modern day. Just classic, like American stories, like Forrest Gump. I would say is definitely a modern day story.
Right. Any story that takes place modern day that doesn't have these other things that we're talking about, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Things like Joe Dirt. I think it's.
Joe Dirt is a classic American story. Classic.
Joe Dirt is the classic American human, really, story. It's really a human story.
It is a human story.
Oh man. Okay. So things
a
like
lot of emotions.
Sorry.
A lot of emotions.
Things like modern warfare, cops versus robbers.
Superheroes. I'd say superheroes is definitely.
Yeah, Ocean's 11.
Modern.
Yeah, so superheroes is a bit of a weird one. Typically, those movies are classified as also science fiction fantasy, as well as like action, adventure, and stuff.
I disagree with that though.
I would also disagree. Here's the difference between superheroes, or actually, what do you think the difference between superheroes and Harry Potter is?
Superheroes are like, I imagine people like Batman, and like where they don't actually necessarily have any kind of superpower. Obviously, there are ones with superpowers, and there are like X-Men and kind of stuff. But Harry Potter is like you're born in this world and like super like Harry Potter doesn't use their powers to help others necessarily.
Well, I mean,
like they wouldn't help. They wouldn't go out of their way to help the Muggle world.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a conflict that you can explore in that kind of story. But in my opinion, superheroes, this is the best way I can say it, modern science fiction, because it's kind of like science fiction is in the future. But like, yeah, there's people like Batman who are just vigilantes.
Yeah.
But then there's people like Superman. But Superman's powers are explained through practical means and not magic. Even the X-Men, right? Like the mutants and, Deadpool or Captain America, he took a science serum Yeah, and stuff like that. And it takes place in modern day, and like, of course, it definitely pushes into science fiction when we get to things like Guardians of the Galaxy, or into fantasy when we look at things like Thor. Um, but yeah, I mean, superheroes in modern day, I personally, I think superheroes are very fun stories. Um, there's a lot of stories coming out now which are really like subverting superhero expectations and like what I mean, like those tropes and stuff, like subverting those tropes and like satirizing kind of superhero classics and stuff nowadays,
Yeah.
which I really like. Honestly, my favorite genre of superhero movies is like Kick-Ass.
Oh, Kick-Ass is great.
Dude, okay, the Kick-Ass movies, if you haven't seen them, dude,
Are
they're
amazing.
so good. Not only are they great films, I love the concept of like superheroes, but like they don't actually have superpowers.
Yeah, they're just vigilantes.
They're just like vigilantes and stuff. I think that's a really fun kind of. I think it'd be a really fun story. I think it's really fun RPG to kind of to play around with and stuff. Anywho, modern day, also you can do stuff like military things, stories like that. Okay, what are the strengths of modern day?
Um, Definitely, I think it's easier to connect with your character in modern day because you yourself live in modern day.
Yeah,
You
you're
know?
not an elf spellcaster.
You are a human doctor,
Yeah.
father
Right.
of four.
Which actually you are in real life, guys. I don't know if you know if Brendan is actually a doctor and a father of four. One of those is mine, by the way. But this episode's going off the rails. Yeah, modern day. We don't need to describe it. Obviously, it's easy. It's Earth right now. You know where things are. You know how things work. There's no. You don't have to like imagine things. Like you know how it works and everything's how it works and it's realistic. That's a strength. But I would argue that the realism is also a weakness. For example, if we were to run let's just say we're running a little one shot in modern day. That's about, gosh, I don't even know. Like gangs, okay? Like gang fights, and you're all cops and you're trying to break into this criminal ring or whatever, right? You have to place it in a place in the real world, right? Maybe someplace like Chicago or whatever. Okay, but now that it's in there, you as the DM typically feel stressed to do research. Get a map of Chicago. Yes, you can make stuff up, like you can make up gangs or whatever, but like, you have to make things realistic. You have to make routes make sense. You have to make, you can only use real places and things, you know what I mean?
Reminds me of that the one D&D. It was kind of like a side D&D system, and it was it was not high fantasy. It was sci-fi, and one of the things in the description of the leader was maybe you're the leader of your little league soccer team.
Yeah.
Like we're gonna play a science fiction world, but we're gonna have it like modern day, where like you're a little kid and you guys gotta beat the Red Dragons at soccer.
Anyway, but do you hear my point on like, as a storyteller, like as a GM or like an author, to place it in modern day, then you have to do research, and you usually feel the need to make it grounded, and that can halt the creative process and stuff like that. So it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
Okay, any kinds of stories can take place in modern day, really. I mean, not any kind, but we don't need to explain this. It's modern day. We've actually spent way too long on this. Okay. Historical fiction.
You get into stuff like imagine a Viking campaign.
Ugh. So much fun. Well, actually,
sailing around.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about Vikings in a second. Well, not a second, a while. Later on this episode. Fiction based off of
Gladiator,
historical events.
Assassin's Creed is a huge historical fiction. Huge,
Yeah.
huge.
I mean, that pushes the boundaries of historical fiction. Typically, historical fiction is like a book about a fictional character who lived through the, slavery in America or whatever. You know what I mean? And like, it's a fictional character and things, but like based in a true historical event or whatever, right? That's like classic historical fiction, but we're talking more geared towards like tabletop RPGs and stuff like that. Things like Assassin's Creed, mwah, mwah. Now, that's not a reflection on Assassin's Creed games themselves. You can have your opinion on the video games, but on the concept.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the most attractive thing about Assassin's Creed? If it's not that because you're an edgy teen and you like to be assassins, it's because of the historical events and locations that the games take place in.
I loved the third one, the one in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
Oh, the fourth one, the pirate one was so
Dude,
good.
that's what I'm saying. Literally, the appeal of the Assassin's Creed games is if you like the setting. So whether it's Renaissance Italy, or it's the Piratical era, or ancient Greece, or ancient Egypt, or the newer one, Valhalla, about the Scandinavian Vikings. Like, that's such a big appeal to a storyteller, or like a gaming group, to play a session or a campaign or to tell a story in an actual historical setting that is rich in mythology and history, and to create a story in there. You know what I mean? Like, that's so much fun. And also because modern day is boring. You know what's not boring? Zeus, dude. Okay. The gladiatorial games.
You have to do a lot more research for this than you would have to do for modern, I think.
Well, here's what I'm going to say. Yes, I would agree that it has the same struggles, but if you're going more of an Assassin's Creed route, there's still so much creative freedom, in my opinion. Where, like, yes, the Revolutionary War, but also there's, like, a secret cult behind things that you're, like, trying to, dismantle and stuff. You know what I mean? That Assassin's Creed has. It adds this other, like, element into it. But yes, I agree. You know what I mean? You do have to do more research. Now, the strength of this over modern day is hindsight. You know how that period in that location went, right?
If you pay attention in history class.
Yeah. You know how it rose. You know how it fell. You know who won the battles. You know who got elected, who became king or queen or whatever it was, right? You have the gift of hindsight, which makes it easier to, like, build stories around things. You know what I mean? What's that really famous battle where, who was it? They, Hannibal and the elephants went over the Alps.
Oh, I don't know.
That event. Anyway, like, who won or lost that battle, but, like, that's a super awesome battle to, like, tell a story in, or to, like, play a one-shot in, or whatever it is, right?
Maybe in 100 years they'll be doing historical fiction campaigns in 2020.
Yep, about fighting the coronavirus. What? Anywho, so you have hindsight. Also, you have, just like I mentioned, just the best historical events and settings to choose from. Yeah, Middle Earth is cool. Yeah, the Star Wars universe is cool. But you know what else is cool? Ancient Greece, dude. Ancient Egypt.
That would be a fun campaign.
Sorry?
That'd be a fun campaign, like an ancient Greek one.
Yeah, all of the, like, so many places, dude. Oh my gosh, feudal Japan. Like, come on.
That would be sick.
That's what I'm saying. There's so many amazing things. And so that's definitely a big bonus. That's probably the big appeal. And of course, the realism. However, as you were saying, the realism, the research. Now, if you're like a big history buff or whatever, that's actually a really big plus. Because you can, like, sneak in people like Da Vinci or Aristotle and stuff, like as NPCs or whatever, you know what I mean? But, to do the research, once again, you don't really have to, depending on how loose and stuff you're going. But when I do something like this, as a GM or a storyteller, I feel the pressure. Not necessarily from my players, but I guess from myself. to do research and make it historically accurate or whatever, right?
Yeah, I do too.
Okay. Also, staticity. The fact that it is static. Yes, you do have hindsight. You know who won the wars. You know when the Roman Empire rose and fell. But also the Empire rose and fell. And so your story can't change that. Does that make sense? Assassin's Creed is great at this because they don't actually change history. The same things still happen, but just in the background, you're dealing with, this evil cult or whatever,
what
right?
What are the bad guys? What are the Templars? Knights
The
of the
Templars. Yeah, the Templars versus the Assassins. So, yeah, you kind of save the world behind the scenes or whatever, but, you didn't change anything, right? Historically.
Yeah.
That staticity can be rough in the scope of what you can have your stories do and what you can have your audience/players do, right? You can't have your players kill so-and-so 15 years before he was killed or whatever, right?
Yeah.
However, speaking of staticity, there's a way you get around that. And that is by going into our next genre. Weird history.
Which almost is a sub. What is it? Subgenre
Genre?
of
Historical fiction.
historical fiction.
Okay.
I mean,
Kind of, but I disagree in the sense that historical fiction is you're going back into ancient Greece, or you're going back into World War II. Weird history is what if
you're going back to World War II and Hitler made zombies.
Yeah, or what if the Roman Empire took over the entire world?
Okay.
So weird history is weird. Damn it. Whoa, weird history is weird? Almost like it has it in the name. On one hand, it's alternate history, but weird history as a genre sometimes also incorporates eldritch influence.
Yeah.
And steampunk.
Like in Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah. So Call of Cthulhu is weird history, but so is Nazi zombies. And games like Scythe or shows like The Man in the High Castle, which are alternate history. Go ahead.
I would say that just Captain America's story, and not include any other Avengers or anything like that, just Captain America's story is weird history.
Yes. 100%. The first Captain America movie is 100% weird history. Because it's about are they the Nazis?
Yeah, Captain America isn't a Nazi.
Right, the enemies. The Nazis find this crystal.
Well, it's Hydra, but Hydra I'm pretty sure it's a sub-faction of the Nazis.
Yeah, and then they find this crystal and it changes the course of the war. Now, the difference between this and historical fiction is you can play a historical fiction adventure or tell a story where that happens. But it's really hidden and nobody knows about it or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Avengers world, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that changed history and stuff.
10th graders have that on their exam.
Yeah, who Captain America was, and Red Skull, and then the Tesseract obviously sticks around, and then there's, so yeah, 100%. Captain America: The First Avenger is a great little taste of weird history. Steampunk is a very big subgenre of weird history, where it takes typically Victorian London, but levels up the technology with piston, steam powered, zeppelins, blimps, stuff like that, while still in Victorian London era. But it's all kind of the same thing. Staples of weird history are things like mad science.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
The occult. So there can definitely even have demonic influences, a Nazi cult who worships Satan and they get turned into demons or whatever it is. Eldritch horror can 100% be a part of weird history. Once again, the classic Lovecraftian tales.
Yeah.
I like weird history. I don't think it really has a lot of content in regards to games, movies, books, stories. And And I don't
Like not
personally
much
have a lot
is
of
like
experience.
in
Yeah.
what is it, like pop culture? There's not much.
Yeah. Like, name a steampunk movie.
Uh, what was that one?
Exact.
The
Exactly.
one set in the Wild Wild West. Is that what it's called? The Wild Wild West.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's it. Or they're like at the very end, they're like battling on this giant like walker.
I have no idea what we're talking about.
Maybe
But
it's
anywho,
not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is. It is. Okay, yeah.
okay, I don't know what that movie is then. Anyway, it's really not that popular and stuff. But I think it's really fun. Alternate history, fleshing out conspiracy theories and like making them true or whatever, like stuff like that, I think is really fun. It takes historical fiction, but it gives you the playground. It releases you from realism and that staticity to be able to do what you want. And like imagine like being in a world where the Nazis had one. You know what I mean? Like that's such an
Yeah.
interesting kind of deal. So we need more weird history stories.
Yeah.
Okay, last one.
The last one, post-apocalyptic. I think post-apocalyptic is to modern day that weird history is to historical fiction.
Nice. That was a good way to describe it. Yeah, that was actually that's pretty good.
I
Yeah,
thought that
it's
like 10 minutes ago. I was just waiting to say
alternate.
it.
It's alternate future. Nani?
Yeah, or like the very start where the future starts to alternate. You know,
Yes. So
like Walking
okay.
Dead.
Yes, exactly. Now, post-apocalyptic kind of also involves like apocalyptic, so like actually during the end of the world, not just the after the end of the world. Also, like dystopian. It fits
Yeah.
into post-apocalyptic, but nobody likes dystopian. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. To me, post-apocalyptic is so attractive. First of all, the end of the world is there's just so much in that. In
Yeah.
that phrase. There's so much story and character and world building and stuff that comes out of that phrase.
The end of the world, I think by human definition, isn't the end of the world. It's the end of humanity.
Yes, the
End
collapse
of
of civilization.
structural. Yeah.
Civilization, yeah. Now, typically it's through some disastrous means. Things like a plague, like an asteroid, a nuclear war. Whoa, something just beeped. Alien invasion, AI overthrow.
So it's
However,
something big and
AI
flashy
overthrow or
in the
something
movies.
typically might transition into like a science fiction story.
Yeah.
Walking Dead, yes, like you mentioned. Perfect example. Obviously, the most classic is a zombie apocalypse. You guys have no idea how much I've wanted to do a zombie apocalypse RPG. Run a one-shot or a campaign, I don't care. I love the zombie apocalypse genre. I don't care how saturated it is. Such a big fan of the zombie apocalypse genre. Every single time I consume a piece of zombie media, I really want to just do that in an RPG, and I've never had the chance to yet. Also because there's not a ton of great systems, but
Yeah.
I love zombies. Now, my personal favorite post-apocalyptic universe is Mad Max. I love Mad Max so much.
Do you know a lot about Mad Max?
Me, I'm okay. I haven't seen the earlier movies and stuff. And I know those actually are not like super post-apocalyptic, like they actually are kind of modern day and then kind of get into post-apocalyptic a little bit. But the most recent Mad Max movie, Fury Road, is one of my favorite films of all time.
Because I want to know
I'm
why
a
they
very-
spray paint their teeth.
Yes.
I've googled
harsh
that and I don't know why they do. Like,
The fumes?
is that what it's called? Like, why they spray paint their teeth?
I think
Like
it's
the-
either the fumes or it's just like a ritual.
Like, because I saw Mad Max Fury Road and I was like, what? Why are they spray painting their teeth?
Yeah. Mad Max Fury Road is one of the greatest films of all time. Go see it. It's an absolute ride. It's so awesome. And the world? I love the world. Mostly because you don't super understand everything. You know just enough to love it, and like they just mention things. You're like, oh, what does that mean? I don't even know what that is. It's just like you just get a taste of it. It's so awesome. I absolutely love Mad Max. Greatest post-apocalyptic Australian world. um, yeah, post-apocalyptic's really fun. Obviously, you can have any kind of end of the world or whatever. And there's obviously like a lot of zombie games like Left 4 Dead and all that kind of stuff. Okay, strengths, weaknesses of stuff of post-apocalyptic settings.
It's rooted in realism,
Yeah.
and there's always going to be some kind of like tension, or always there's going to be stakes. Whether it's something small like your community is going to get overrun by zombies, which I don't know if that's really small,
Yeah.
but compared to my next one, it could be maybe another nuclear warhead was left unfired, and your party is the one to go across to post-apocalyptic America and deactivate this nuclear bomb before it blows up the whole.
There is just innate tension and stakes in post-apocalyptic because the primary theme is survival. And humanity will never get bored of consuming stories about survival.
Yes.
And man's battle against the forces of nature. And post-apocalyptic has such an intense, deep, intriguing theme such as survival baked into its core. Whether you're trying to survive from zombies or in a nuclear fallout or whatever it is, it's just innately so intense. And has those kind of stakes or whatever. Also, there's not a lot of humans left or whatever. The fate of humanity is also resting in what humans remain and stuff like that. So, yeah. I love post-apocalyptic. It's really awesome. I think the limits and the weaknesses come in the boundaries. Zombies are fun. Sorry, go ahead.
You couldn't have an alien invasion, like oh, you were hiding from the aliens, but also there's zombies now halfway through the campaign. You know, that wouldn't make sense.
I just feel like zombies is cool and a really strong theme and stuff, but like there's only so much you can do. They're still just surviving in the ruins of Earth and stuff. And there's no,
the only enemy is other humans and zombies.
There's no like magic or anything, and obviously you can keep a story going or whatever. But I think there's a lot of like boundaries. An example like Mad Max, most of the world is a wasteland.
There's not much you can explore.
There's not much you can explore and stuff like that. So like, I think there are a lot of boundaries in it as well, which I think is another reason why it's hard to find a good post-apocalyptic RPG system, tabletop RPG system, or to like make one of those kinds of games. Excuse me, because it's actually kind of hard. Like, what do you do in a post-zombie apocalypse RPG? You know?
Yeah.
You don't go on quests to slay dragons and get treasure and stuff. You're not trying to deal with the political drama between the galaxy, the galactic civilizations.
Yeah.
Just survive, or you know what I mean?
Survive or die. I mean,
so like it's hard to create, definitely for a thing like a tabletop. Obviously you can make a story if you're a writer or whatever, but it's like a tabletop RPG where you have to pull players along and stuff and give them like stuff to do and stuff to complete. It's much harder. Whereas if you're just writing like a script or a novel or whatever, like the themes of survivability and human conscience and morality and stuff, and like you can have it's easier to create a story based on like a couple characters or one character who deals with his sanity and like his conscience and his morals while also trying to survive. It's harder to do that in like an RPG. You know what I mean? So that's why I think it's really hard in that sense. Why Skyrim is just such an easier game to make than Fallout.
Yeah. I definitely think Fallout... No, I think Skyrim's a better game than Fallout.
Yeah, because Skyrim, it's classic. Go kill dragons, and there's all these different kind of fantasy kingdoms and races and monsters
Yeah.
and dungeons. Whereas in Fallout, there's like some civilizations and towns, and like you can you're kind of like building up a settlement, but the quests and stuff like that just don't. The RPG-ness doesn't doesn't work as well
Yeah.
in relation, opposed to like fantasy. So that's what's rough, because post-apocalyptic is like one of my favorite settings ever. You know what I mean?
It's a good one.
It's like all these are good ones. This has made me like want to play everything now. I'm like, I want to do a cyberpunk campaign, and I want to do a historical fiction campaign.
One every day of the week.
Yep. So guys, expect now an episode every single day where we play a one-shot in each of these different genres. No, actually, let us know if you have any questions, or if you're working on any kind of campaign settings or stories or scripts in any of these genres, what your kind of favorite settings and genres are, either on Instagram or on our Discord or whatever it is. And also kind of what you want to see. Because right now we're finishing up an actual play series in I don't even know what the heck One Piece would fit in. No, like a fantasy world.
Yeah, it's definitely fantasy. It wouldn't be. Yeah, because it's a whole different world. It'd be fantasy.
Yeah, it's not high fantasy, but it is a fantasy world.
I'd say it's like
and then of
modern.
course,
No, not modern. Pirate fantasy.
yeah, it's
pirate fantasy.
Pirate fantasy. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
But those have been, it's a different system. It's not D&D, but that was fantasy. And then the first actual play series we did called Unwelcome Spirits is also fantasy. So I want to start doing other things and trying out other systems, because there's like a million D&D 5e playthroughs you can find on the internet these days. But I want to show off different systems, different genres, and stuff like that. So also let us know if you want to get a science fiction miniseries.
I think we need to play Mork Bork.
Morkborg?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is fantasy too, but you
You were showing me the PDF.
Oh,
it looks
yeah.
so cool.
Yeah, Morkborg is really cool. It's like a really basic fantasy like RPG system based around I can't think of them right now, but older classical games. Can't think of what they're called right now. And just the design of the book.
Yeah,
it's very evocative,
super cool.
Evocative and artistic. But like, do you want to see us do like kind of like an Assassin's Creed kind of deal, or like a weird history kind of deal? I'm thinking of doing a Star Wars miniseries as well, where we play through a little Star Wars adventure to kind of show off that system. And I have a lot of friends who are really into Star Wars that have been trying to get into RPGs and stuff. So to get those guests on as well, I think will be a lot of fun. So let us know. What I was going to say when you mentioned Vikings earlier. Right now, on the forefront of my mind, I have this vision for like this setting that that is Mad Max meets Vikings. Like I told you before.
Oh,
So
that would
it's
be
like
cool. Like flying
Norse-
ships, or like
Norse
like
people
long
in, like,
ships on huge.
Yeah, on wheels. In like, but instead of like the Australian desert wasteland, it's like in the Scandinavian tundra wasteland.
Oh,
And-
that would be so sick.
And you know how like they're split up in like the Clan Raven and the Bear Clan and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like they still like have those allegiances, and then like, I just think that would be such a cool world, because I don't know, I feel like the Norse, the Viking, like their values and like their vibe fits really well into like the brutal survival of Mad Max and post-apocalypticness.
Yeah, it would be epic. That would be awesome.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's like a setting for a regular system, or if that should be its own RPG system that I should build or whatever. Maybe I'll keep you guys updated if I keep with this idea. But anywho, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think we covered everything in really good detail. I mean, how long we've been?
Hour and 15 minutes.
Jeez.
Yeah, hopefully maybe this inspired you or something, or helped you kind of figure out what you want to do, what kind of story you want to tell, what kind of setting maybe it fits into. This inspired me. Like, I just want to do everything now. You know what I mean, dude?
All right, science fiction, Mad Max, Vikings, That's also weird history.
Yeah, and also, you're all the soccer team. Okay.
You're also the soccer team.
Okay. Let us know if you want us to do this a bonus episode. So we've been playing Rocket League recently. This is really off topic, but we've been making jokes about like oh, Brendan started it like, oh, if I don't get this shot, I'm not gonna make it on varsity, like as a joke. And then we had this like little session, and like we sat down and we like planned out the skeleton of like a Rocket League like movie, like a teen sports action romance
Like
film.
Disney or Nickelodeon movie.
Yeah, exactly. About high schoolers in the future who the blood sport of driving cars to hit the massive soccer ball. The next sports movie. Anyway, if you want to actually like get a bonus episode where like we talk about that and like break that down, we'll do it. We'll do it. We will do it. That actually should be a new a series on our podcast where like we make a movie. You know what I mean? Like we come up with with a movie based off of like Rocket League or like the Mystic Clash. Okay, that's enough for us today, you guys. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you for having me.
Welcome back, Brendan. You're probably gonna see him again. He's kind of becoming a regular. It's kind of nice. I'm like switching off between my two friends, and I got my two regulars. I got a little schedule forming up here. Hey guys, look out for the next One Piece episode this Friday, which Brandon is GMing. That's gonna be a lot of fun. I think session 2, right?
Yeah, session 2.
Yeah, we've recorded like a lot of it, so I'm
things get spicy.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back to session 2 because we've already recorded quite a lot, but session 2, I believe, is yeah. Okay, hey guys, thanks so much for listening. Once again, follow us on Discord, on Instagram at D20_Academy. Hop on our Discord. Let us know what you thought about the podcast episode and what you want in the next podcast episode, stuff like that. Once again, if you're an aspiring GM who wants to build their own campaign, I take you through every single step of the process at D20Academy.com. Thank you so much again for listening. Brendan, thank you so much for coming on. And let's go play some soccer.
All right. Some Rocket League.
No, like actual soccer.
Oh, okay.
Because we're a soccer team. And you're a team captain. Dude, that was one of the character classes. It was like, do you want to be a space pilot, a space knight, or the captain of your soccer team? So weird. I don't remember what that... It was like a homebrew sci-fi system.
Yeah. It was okay. It wasn't
Sure.
great, but I thought it was okay.
Actually, the ship stuff was actually pretty cool.
Yeah, the ship stuff was good.
All right, we're dilly-dallying. Thank you guys so much. Bye-bye.